Welcome back to the Backseat Startup Podcast with your host, Andrew Hutton.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Backseat Startup Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Hutton, and I'm on with Justin, founder of SoftwareTesting.ai. If you're a listener of the pod, we do have a lot of AI startups. I think it's about right given the climate and what's going on. This one's really exciting because, again, like so many of the founders that I've been talking to, Justin is building very practical, tactical AI apps, and this is not pie in the sky. This is real. So Justin, I'm excited to dig in. I'm excited to do what we do and go share some wisdom with the world in terms of answering some questions from Reddit. But welcome to the show, Justin. Really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome. So like I said, like everyone knows, there's a 1,000,001 AI startups. Tell us a little bit about Software AI. I'd love to get to know you and what you're building, and kind of where you fit in the landscape of AI tools.
Yeah. So Software Testing AI is a testing tool that helps developers increase and analyze their test coverage. So there's a big gap with developers trying to balance speed of delivery and the quality of the code they're delivering. And what we're setting out to do is build a tool that helps developers write test cases quickly and effective test cases to fill the gaps in their test coverage.
That's we were talking before, and yeah, like every startup, I've been a part of many, in various cases, founder, early team member, and yeah, it's always a balance of like move fast and break things, but also, try to not break things, create really, whether it's not creating technical debt or just creating quality experiences, right? So what you're building is allowing, it's almost like you're moving the frontier, the possibility of what's possible out to both move fast and not break things, which is maybe that should be your headline: move fast but don't break things, because that's
I like
the vibe,
that.
right? That's the vibe. So so this is like, so startups are moving fast, but big companies are too, right? Who's using this kind of app today?
Yeah, so right now, mainly individual developers using our phase one of the app, but we recently just launched our second phase, which is kind of like what we were talking about a bit earlier, where our first phase was just, can we generate test cases using AI? And
right.
we built out a VS Code extension where you just highlight your code and we'll write test cases for you. But phase two is what we have really targeting towards those development teams that are trying to move fast and not break things. I like that tagline.
Cool. Yeah, so tell us more about phase two, right? So when you move from VS Code to GitHub, kind of giving away the surprise. But yeah, tell us more about the evolution of the product.
Yeah, so like I said, phase two is inside of GitHub as a GitHub app, and what we do is, traditional tools, they analyze your test coverage. They let you know, saying, hey, here's your test coverage and here's your gaps of test coverage. And for me, like I like seeing a problem, but I also like, being told a solution too, or at least being recommended a solution. And that's what we're striving to do. So when you have in GitHub Actions your tests executed there, the GitHub app will pick up a webhook. When the action's completed, we'll analyze those tests, which tests passed, which tests failed, what's your code coverage on those tests. From there, we then plug that into our AI model that will recommend test cases for those coverage gaps that we identified. And
Cool.
This is really what we're kind of targeting for those types of companies and teams.
Yeah. So you're enabling engineers to run the tests. So there's two use cases. One is you're an engineer and you are running a lot of tests and it's taking a lot of time, and now you can go faster. Or you're an engineer and you're cutting corners and you shouldn't be, right? In both cases, you kind of move forward and, like you said, move faster and or don't break things. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So this, you're an engineer. This is building for yourself. Tell me a little bit of the story. Tell our audience, because I know we just talked about it. Where did this come from? Like, what's your background and yeah, how did this come to be?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about me. I started my first company back when I was a student with two professors and another student, and we were focusing in on like video content delivery, and we got a little bit of money from Verizon, and this was back in the day that like everyone was building a Netflix competitor, and you kind of see where that's going. Where we were, trying to do some research around content delivery networks and trying to commercialize that with Verizon, and that ended up not working out. But around that time, that was that startup was ending. I ended up going to Loon, which is part of Google X, and that what they did was like they had stratospheric balloons that would kind of provide network coverage to people from with LTE, 4G, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I really learned a lot about perfecting kind of my engineering and getting better at that, and I then wanted though something that was more of like a startup again. I really like that culture and really like that environment. So I joined a telehealth startup as one of the first few engineers, and quickly kind of rose through the ranks to be the head of software development there for a while. And I realized kind of through my experiences there, my experiences with other startups, advising and helping them out, is that like there really is this struggle between how do we get speed and how do we do it at a point where it's quality, and it's hard where if sometimes you're going full 110% and it causes bugs, it causes outages, and those have a real world impact too that we need to
Yeah.
help stop.
Yeah, I love that you've seen it all. I love that you came back to startups because you just had to. That's it's always important to see how the grass is on the other side, but then to take those learnings back and navigate your career, and yeah, between the big thing at Google, the startups within Google, which I'm sure don't feel quite like startups, and then seeing it all the way through. That's the kind of experience I love to see in a founder, right? You've seen all the angles, you've done it yourself, you've had that failure under your belt, and now you're ready to. I also just love how specific this is. That's one of my. When I talk to a lot of founders, they, so many of their ideas are so unspecific, right? And they don't have this like intimate like level of understanding of the problem, right? But man, I think you've lived it. I think you've lived it. So Justin, thanks so much for putting everything you're building there with software testing AI on the table. Really excited for that and follow along. Actually, no, you didn't say something I think was really cool. How many folks have been downloading this, and like what's coming up next for you? Like you're somewhere. That's really interesting. I love it.
Thanks. Yeah, so phase one has over 700 downloads on the VS Code marketplace, and we just launched that V2 that we were talking about, and our next milestone is getting V2 up to 100 downloads. So that's that GitHub app that analyzes your coverage and suggests potential solutions for those coverage gaps. So
yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
love
what
it.
we're.
Anyone who's an engineer needs to go check this out. I mean, I guess you have to use GitHub too, right? But if you are that, then jump over there, go find it. So let's jump over to the meat and potatoes of what we do here, Justin. And here, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look at the Wild West that is Reddit, and see what we find. I've already been scrolling a little bit because I found an idea that let's just take a second and see what we got here.
Today's episode of the Backseat Startup Podcast is brought to you by SeedScout. SeedScout is a cold outreach alternative that relies 100% on an autonomous double opt-intro system. Log in, pick a plan, and request intros to investors at ease. On SeedScout, know what investors are active, which ones have recently engaged, and send intro requests to ideal investors with a click of a button. Once connected, carry on the conversation over email and feel free to take it off platform. Now, back to the show.
Scroll up a little bit. Some of these aren't even questions. Found my ideal co-founder. Actually, I didn't ask. Are you a solo founder? Have you been searching for a co-founder? How's that journey been for you?
Yeah, I'm a solo founder at the moment. I'm open to potentially a co-founder. I think if I was gonna have a co-founder, I'd want someone with like a strong like more kind of sales marketing background, because I have the engineering chops, but I think that's something where I'm looking to grow. And
yeah, there's a whole conversation there. I think we've talked about it with some other founders recently, just in the sense of you don't need a co-founder, these days. Most of the time you don't, and you should be able to learn most everything. You're going to build a team eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, technical person with ideas and motivation to learn technical things. I'm sure that's you. I have a decent technical skills, business. I get bored with corporate engineering. They immediately assume I'm CTO and that they are the CTO. That's really interesting. You're the CEO. You're the only one here, right? So have you ever come across this little bit of a bias where if you're technical, people assume that you're not doing non-technical stuff?
I think so. I think there's definitely sometimes a bit of a bias where it's if you're able to wear both hats, there's definitely some people that sometimes they think that you're either CEO and that you're not technical, or they think that you're CTO and you're too technical.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, let's go back to these two questions and kind of make our own in between them, because the idea of like navigating that technical and non-technical roles, whether you are sitting in the seat of being a technical founder who is the only founder, and so you're definitely wearing all the hats, and you've already got 700. You're doing something right when it comes to sales and marketing and non-technical stuff. I mean, let's actually so talk to me about that journey. Like, so you mentioned at the startup as well as at Google, you learned a lot of engineering chops. You learned how to be a head of software at a startup. So you've learned and grown as an engineer. How have you learned and grown as a CEO or a founder and all the other things that go into a business? What's that journey been like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's been definitely interesting. So I've been reading a lot of books, listening to a lot of podcasts, and also just trying things and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And I think that's kind of where the real sort of learnings happen is I like reading a lot of these like sort of tactical books. Like I recently read the SaaS Playbook by Rob Walling,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really good book with a lot of different tactics and a lot of different ideas. And then it's all about just trying them out, right? And seeing like what works, what doesn't work. And then I really also like seeing when it doesn't work. Like I want to deep dive in and see, well, why did that not work, so I could learn from it.
Your
You know?
engineer minds plays a role. I love that. I love that. So, so I've actually not heard of this book, but I'm immediately like assuming because what it might talk about, because my I'm a non-technical person, and I have a consulting background. I've been a founder. I've been a founder coach and many other things for entrepreneurs, but I'm woefully non-technical in like the realest way. But what I understand and know about SaaS is that there's a lot of kind of like, they're not rules, but there's a lot of like things that have been figured out, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
things that have been tried, and there's some certain archetypes. There's the product like growth side, there's the enterprise side, there's like things in the middle, there's, so whether it's a growth tactic or an engineering tactic. So I'm curious, like, what were some of the big takeaways, whether it's from that book or just again, like as that book kind of like covers some of the things that you're building, like what are some of the more specifics of things that you've taken away from that?
Yeah, so I think kind of the biggest thing was like outbound marketing, because like from what I've mainly been doing is like writing developer guides. I have like a developer newsletter, and it's like that's sort of what I've been thinking about. Like, okay, if I add value in terms of content that people find helpful in that sort of software testing space, then that'll hopefully get some traction from Google or Twitter or wherever it is, and people then hopefully check out software testing AI and like the product. But I think it kind of opened my eyes to like, well, there's a whole other side of it also, which is like cold email, and
Yeah.
like that type of stuff where I really was never exposed to that, and I think that's something that I'm starting to try actually.
Really, really. No, I mean, I have a ton of thoughts on this because most
Mhm.
SaaS companies, well, one, B2, it has to be B2B. Most SaaS is B2B, but when it's B2B SaaS, you absolutely can do these cold outbound campaigns because you're hitting people through LinkedIn, you're, asking them about work. It's like very okay, right? Versus like trying to find, consumers is actually a different animal, right? So SaaS, B2B, And then yeah, your go-to-market probably includes, almost certainly as you scale, some good amounts of outbound, right? Whether it's whether it's warm, whether people are coming in through marketing channels, that idea of a marketing qualified lead, or you're just kind of like going outbound and do some sales qualification, right? So you've got to build that funnel at some points. I don't know, is that sort of how the book talks about it in terms of building the beginnings of your sales and your marketing funnels?
Yeah, it talks about a variety of different. So like one of their sections was just all about different types of like marketing strategies that you could take, and it talked about like some of the pros, some of the cons, and what I think I liked about it is kind of they had this theme of that there's some marketing approaches that are slower and there's some that are quicker. So it was mentioning that like SEO and content, it could take a while for that content to rank. It could take a while for that to really provide value. But something like cold email, it could be almost instant, right? If you send out a blast to 100 prospects, and you get, a couple of responses like that, that's instant leads that you could start nurturing and trying to bring through the funnel further. And yeah, that's something that I think I want to apply to software testing AI.
Well, and one of the things I love about that is not just that like you can have immediate results, but even when you're super early and you might not know exactly what your killer value propositions are, you might not know exactly who your target market is, you can learn so much by getting folks on the phone in that kind of middle of the funnel, right? Before you're putting the hard sell on them. It's really a learning, and sales is learning. It's questions before you pitch, right? And so actually I was talking about this with somebody else, and we got into just talking about go to market and all these different things, and we were talking about customer discovery, right? And how I'm sure there's been some element of this. You didn't just like build the first thing you thought of, right? I'm sure you talked to a bunch of folks. And how has that been in terms of like getting in front of customers, these 700 customers or 700 downloads? I'm sure some of them have been giving feedback, or even before you built your first V1, right? What's that been like for you to get in front of customers and get into market?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful, right? And like one of the things that I think is like engineers, a lot of times we get married to the solution in a sense, but really like, early stage, like we should be getting married to the problem, and that's something where I've kind of, I knew that software testing is a struggle for teams. Like I've experienced it myself, many different places. I've seen many places experience it, and I know it's an issue, but that's kind of what happened where I launched V1 kind of thinking like, hey, well, hopefully this will help, right? And then I started seeing from user feedback and hearing from users that like it is helpful, but something like this might be able to solve the problem better. And that's kind of where V2 came from, where it's like it's tackling that same problem, but it's just a different angle to solving it. You know?
Yeah. Again, the thought we were having with on the last pod was that like as much as you're like going to market and like whether it's selling or cold outbound or content marketing, whatever you're doing, so much is getting that first thing out there. So there is something about builds. You got to build. You want to be iterative and build quickly, right? And sometimes you just build to scratch your own itch, just so you can get feedback, right? Just so people can tell you what works and what doesn't. And I mean, it goes to show that you had some really good product sense, some good intuition. That's probably a whole other topic we could talk about, that like product intuition of how do you kind of trust your sense of problems and how to turn those into kind of interesting solutions. That's really exciting. So as and being a technical person, again, that's kind of the frame I wanted to have for this is these are all things that non-technical people do or would take on if you had a co-founder division of labor, and you've just obviously had to do it, right? How do you balance all that with building? Actually, that's an interesting question. I would ask as somebody who's not a builder, who only has one option: go talk to customers, right? But you have the option, right? So how do you balance building with all these other activities?
Yeah, so I think I try to split my time, and I try to have like very specific goals that I'm trying to set and try to estimate those. So for example, if I want to get user feedback, I'll purposely like schedule out a few calls with potential users, and then once I get that feedback, I'll think it through of like, okay, well, is this something where it's just like a positioning thing? Is this something where we need to build a new feature? And I just kind of like, I try to get it to that point where it's like a 50-50 balance. But as an engineer, I love building. So it's really more like 75 building, 25 business stuff. But I think that's something I need to work on, is probably bring that back to 50-50 a little bit more. But
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Well, there's just always, it's like you said, it's a balance, and I mean, you're never getting it right. You're usually swinging one way or the other, and if you're early, as you are, the product's got to get built, right? So I'm sure
Yeah.
there's always stuff, but then at some point, you're just building, you're building things that aren't necessary, right? It's no longer minimal MVP sort of thinking, right? You've gone a little.
Yeah.
How did you like scope your MVP? That's actually another question I'm really curious about. Like, how did you decide what was in and what was out?
Yeah. So the way that I scoped kind of that phase one, I was just like, I need to have some way to write tests given a certain amount, a certain section of code. So that was kind of the bare minimum requirements that I set. And that's where I kind of settled on the VS Code extension, because VS Code is a very popular code editor. It is really extendable APIs and integration support. So I was like, all right, that's a good place to land. And I then like invested a lot of time in building that backend, and I built out just like very simple API. Even before I started doing that VS Code extension, was just can I send it some code and get back a response that makes sense, So once I tuned the model, it was then, all right, let's incorporate that in VS Code with simple functionality. And then I started adding to it. And from there, I started, once you get to a point, like you can kind of see when it's like, all right, I need to go to more business stuff. So for example, like I think it was a little while back, so with TypeScript, it's essentially like a like type safe JavaScript, and
Right.
You could get around it by just putting in a type of any, and any type of of data flowing through that variable would go through, and
I see.
that's like the quick and dirty hack to just get stuff launched. When I found myself like writing out whole objects and structuring whole objects to replace that, I was like, all right, that now it's time to really go back to business stuff.
I see. I see.
Right.
I love it. So this is a fascinating conversation to me, because you literally have both hats on, and you get to like play off like when and how much do you wear, and like the technical versus non-technical founder. You are both in one. And yeah, as soon as you kind of got a little deeper into the code, and you're not being quick and dirty, you're being like elegant and building for robustness or whatnot. Yeah, you got to go sell. You got to get this thing out there. Actually, I was looking back at that post on Reddit, and the one founder was saying, "I'm technical, but everyone assumes that's like all I do. Should I get a technical co-founder so I can go do business stuff?" Would you ever do that? That sounds kind of crazy. I mean, to be like,
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Like versus like kind of covering up some of your, not weaknesses, but obviously someone else has strengths that can complement yours, right? And that's where you said like I'd get a sales and marketing kind of co-founder type, right? But I don't know, that's an interesting thought process.
Yeah,
Might be a good idea, it might not be.
that's super interesting, because like at least for me, like I love like building stuff and I love writing code. So like if I was like, all right, I'm going to get a technical co-founder so I don't have to write code anymore, like that would actually be like I think a negative to me. Maybe just the way that I'm wired.
Yeah.
But,
Well, what you're saying is it's as much about what you're good at and what you can do as well as what you want to do, right? And
yeah.
you're very, very happy to write. And if you could write more, or be engineering, and if you could do more of that, then that would be a win. Versus, yeah, this if we're giving advice to founders on the internet, this guy on Reddit sounds like he wants to be doing more. Gets a little chafed that people have put him in a bucket, and therefore, yeah, maybe that's an interesting idea. Like get yourself out of there by get where, as like career advice, I would tell people all the time, yeah, go get a job that pushes you to new things, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you've had that experience where you bite off something you're not very good at, because that's how you grow, right? Like, yeah, go do it. That sounds awesome, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think you always need to be a little bit uncomfortable, because that's how you learn, right? Those areas of not feeling fully confident you could deliver something is where you really get a chance to see, well, okay, what do I need to know in order to be confident to deliver this, and kind of get that learning. And if that's could be an approach, right? If someone's very technical and they want to get into more of the marketing business side, getting a technical, and they'd also be very good at evaluating that technical co-founder too, because they have that background. So,
right. And then there's such a good kind of play off, because you're both speaking that same language. And then you're kind of doing one of the harder steps first, which is like learning how to grow into new things. If you as a founder probably couldn't do that. So again, if our friend on Reddit couldn't step into a non-technical CEO role, he might struggle as a founder in general, right? There's a lot to kind of learn, that you're gonna have to participate in fundraising, you're gonna have to participate in sales and products and all sorts of non-technical CTO style stuff, right? So yeah, in some ways it's weird to say set yourself the challenge, because you're gonna face those challenges anyway, right? But maybe why not? Justin, this is a lot of fun. We could probably riff all day, but want to round out our conversation here. So softwaretesting.ai, very live. The new thing on the GitHub App Store Marketplace is live. Softwaretesting.ai, you got the right URL. Tell people how they should find you, get involved. What's the call to action?
Yeah, so if you're interested in trying out software testing AI, then we're live on the GitHub Marketplace, like you said. And then, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm always, trying to post updates and get that stuff. So it's Justin_Trugman. And definitely if people find it interesting and want to try to play around with the tool, I'm always open for feedback and always open to hopping on calls and hearing from users. So definitely feel free to reach out and give it a try.
Perfect. You want to get involved early stages, try things out, see how Justin is building this and be along for the ride, get in touch on all the ways, Twitter, download the app, or get it going in GitHub. So with that, Justin, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, thanks for listening. Great conversation. We'll see you around the next time. So thanks and take care.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, bye everyone.
The Backseat Startup Podcast is brought to you by StartupStage, formerly known as Startup Founder Daily. StartupStage is the place to showcase your startup and compete for features across our channels. Each week, users can vote for their favorite startups. The top 3 companies, as determined by the votes, are then selected for special features across our blog, podcast, newsletter, and social media platforms. Hit the link in the description below to apply.